Hello and welcome to our IndigiLit series. This series highlights books and media by Native or Indigenous creators. And today we will be discussing Elatsoe by Darcie Little Badger. So first we're going to do some introductions. My name is Marissa and I work in the outreach department at the library. And let's start with our facilitator.
Hello, my name is Ariel Ojibway. And I really love reading and YA books especially, and fantasy fiction, and I'm a member of the Sioux tribe.
My name is Jacob. I am an employee at Ann Arbor District Library, where I work in the outreach department with Marissa. I'm really excited to be here. I really enjoyed reading this book. It's right up my alley.
I'm Elizabeth, and I work in the archives department at the library, and I also am very excited to discuss this book today.
So I thought maybe I will just say that Elatsoe is by Darcie Little Badger, a Lipan Apache woman, and it's about a Lipan Apache teen, and it follows Ellie, or Elatsoe, investigating or uncovering the truth of her cousin's murder. And they're in a world, as you all know, similar to ours, but filled with creatures from mythology and legends from Western culture and Lipan Apache culture. So I was thinking we could start with a fun question about, does anybody have a favorite monster?
I have too many favorite monsters.
I will go with my favorite first. The scarecrows really creeped me out. They were only, mentioned a few times, but yeah, I did not like the living scarecrows and then them spreading with the monoculture, and yeah. So.
Yeah, I was really hoping they would make an appearance because they seemed so creepy. Yeah, I loved the detail of that they're tied with the monoculture agriculture. That was so cool. I thought they were really cool. I also loved the coyote woman. She's not a monster, but just her presence I thought was so cool.
I was quite fond of the trilobite ghost.
Yeah, so cute.
And maybe my favorite monster moment, but not my favorite monster, is when Elatsoe or Ellie and her mother Vivian are attacked by a vampire. And the mom's like, "You are not invited into my home." And they're like, "We're not in your home." And they were like, "Yeah, you certainly are." And I was like, "Ah!
That was amazing.
Yeah, I think that was one of my favorite parts of the entire book. I was literally screaming. I was just like, "Oh my gosh, this is amazing."
It was so exciting, and I didn't see that coming. But wrapping the vampire mythology and being invited with "This is our homeland," it was so good.
It was so satisfying.
Yes.
I can't remember the name of the monster that I want to say was my favorite. It was an ancient monster, and Elatsoe and her cousin find it in the woods. And he's this old creepy man,
the leech man,
yeah, and then she
hair.
Summons the mosquitoes and attacks him.
Yeah,
that's really cool.
And then when I was going back, the hair was being described as mycelium running everywhere, and with the mushrooms later, and him being the leech man. It's wow, I didn't see it the first time. Yeah. The soy and the monoculture, and a little bit with Coyote Lady, I think, is brings up really cool ways that Little Badger, I think, brings the real world into mythology and legends, and mythology and legends into the real world. I thought, yeah, this is a storybook land, but still her river is polluted, and vampires are discriminated against, and it's very interesting how she overlaps those things. I was wondering, did you notice any parts like that stood out to you? of like, oh, okay. I'll stop talking.
Mostly just in general, I like to go into books blind. I don't like to know a lot about them when I start. And so I knew that this was about a girl who could like raise ghosts. And so I knew that ghosts for sure were gonna exist in this world. But then when there were vampires and like all this other stuff came up, I was just like, oh, this is like a different kind of book than I was expecting. Like magic isn't this crazy thing. Like magic exists, it's a thing. There's these mushroom portals. Like it's such a part of the world in a way that I wasn't expecting from the opening chapter, at least, which was very cool. And yet it's so like rooted in the real world that I really appreciated. Like she's in the fossil museum and like she gets a receipt. And of course I'm like, it's not a part of my experience to be like, oh, that's weird that she wants a receipt for this. And then of course it's because she's brown and they're like, did you pay for that? And it just like felt like such a real world thing that happens combined with everything else that was happening. It just, yeah, I really liked this book a lot. It wove together these fantastical things and these very real things in a really beautiful way.
Yeah, I definitely felt like, oh, sorry.
No.
You can go ahead. Okay. I just felt like I really noticed the like environmentalism and like push towards like illustrating that like settler colonial impact on the environment. And the one way she does that is through the like takeover of the monsters, and like the monsters are invasive monsters, so they're like monsters that have been there forever, and then there are new monsters. So I thought that was really interesting. And then the vampire story also I think was interesting because they're cursed, and then she ends up meeting the Lipan vampire in the end, and he's kind of like, yeah, I used to be, but now I'm a vampire. And it's kind of shows like just the way that cultures have been erased historically through that.
Yeah. And to piggyback off of what all y'all have just said, I also, the real life mixing with the magical life, when the fake psychic comes to do a fake psychic reading, it's like, even in a world where being psychic is really normal, or more normal than it is in perhaps our world, there's still fake psychics who are trying to make a buck on a TV show. And I was like, that's a funny, real, fake. It was one of those moments where she blends our world with the world that she created in this book, which just makes it even more magical.
Yeah, I thought that I just love the overlap, how it's not always that way in magical books, but it's completely interwoven. And the monsters that you mentioned, Elizabeth, like I thought it was interesting how sometimes the monsters and the magical world or the mythologies from different cultures would like butt heads, and sometimes they would work together and like help each other out or like make a point. Like Ellie often talks about Icarus and like Greek mythology, whereas I feel like some of the fairy or other Western mythology was the myths of her people, so in some places. And I thought that was just an interesting way to portray that. But also, Marissa, you brought up social justice aspects. How does a teenager like Ellie seek justice for somebody she loves in a world that is often stacked against her and other people like her? American culture and Native culture, both with me growing up, that in lots of ways, that I was just, it felt like empowering to read, or pieces of history that the author like took back and was like, no, we want, I really loved pieces that she did. For example, sixth grade, as you know, wakes up ghosts and has her huge pack of dogs. But Ellie mentions in the book, she's not just like violent, protecting her people. And at one point, she brings to life a whole stampede of buffalo and crushes the cavalry that's coming. So that was one of many ways that I was like, yes, that was awesome. That she's getting justice. So I was wondering, did any of those pieces stand out for you? Well, you already talked about the vampire one specifically, which was amazing.
This isn't about justice specifically, but then just so much, there's so much knowledge in this book that I really appreciated. Like when I was reading it, I was like, this would have been cool to read as a teen, or like if I had kids, I would definitely want them to read this. Like when they're talking about Teddy Roosevelt, like, and the bear that mauled him, and then they were like, oh, that seems weird because wasn't he a good man? Or like, oh, but he also like really hated Native people, and wouldn't he intentionally try to make his wound go on a Native person because he was kind of a bad dude? And like all these little moments like really stood out to me. The bear one definitely stood out a lot. I know that's not exactly your question, but just like the Native stories that are woven into it.
I think it is, and I think it goes back to also the real life and mythology together, because I think that she did a great job of throwing real history in there, like with Teddy Roosevelt and the quote, the only Indian is a good, or the only good Indian is a dead Indian. Like, hello, that's a president of the United States, you know, or like getting the money back at the museum store and being like, well, these are a lot easier on the eyes than Jackson the Indian Killer, although I'm no fan of many of the founding fathers. So those were things. And speaking of, and the genocide, and the Lipan Apache were at one point, I believe, according to various histories, prisoners of war of the United States, and then dispersed at some point away farther from their homelands. So like that is in the book too. So just like throwing those in with like, oh, I'm just going to a rock store, or whoa, we're learning about the magical mushroom wizard.
I guess for me, oh, sorry. I guess for me, like justice and vengeance kind of stood out as like two contrasting themes that were like kind of inseparable there, because like at the beginning, Ellie's like, I want justice. And then Lenore is like, we want vengeance. And then the two kind of like become blurred. And then towards the end, Ellie, I think, does achieve justice because she does what she does. She gets rid of the guy. And when she's getting rid of him, she's like, this is for all the people that you would have hurt in the future. And I felt like that was a really good example of justice.
And Ellie never really questions. There's never a moment where she's like, you know, Trevor came to me in my dream and I'm not sure if I'm going to pursue this. She's like, her ambition, or that's not the right word, the journey she takes towards getting justice for her cousin, it was what she was going to do no matter what. There was never second guessing. There was never a question. And that's something that I really appreciate in a character, especially in a young adult novel. And like how Elizabeth said, how that played off with Lenore, and how Lenore had kind of a different viewpoint into justice. And whether that viewpoint is valid or not, that's what that kind of relationship asked of us as readers. And I was like, this is cool.
I didn't think about that vengeance versus justice, but yeah, that was strong. And yeah, thank you for bringing that up. Sorry, Marissa, what were you going to say?
Oh, just something Jacob said made me think about how satisfying it was to read a book where her parents were just like, yeah, we believe you. And we're going to help you with this. Like, it just like was so satisfying seeing a good teen parent relationship. And and to have like the full support of her parents that like understood culturally what she was talking about, that were fully on board with like, yes, we need to get justice for Trevor.
I wanted to make mention of Ellie's relationship with her bestie Jay, and how Jay is also very supportive. And I love how Jay is in a sidekick role. She texts Jay, "Will you research this for me?" And Jay's like, "I'm on it."
Mm-hmm.
And I thought that was a really, I just really loved their friendship. And I love the character of Jay, who just wears like really tight clothes and like he's a cheerleader and like a master Googler.
Yeah.
And also like a fairy traveler. I was like, I just like this whole thing. I like how it's all set up.
Yeah.
And always a sense of humor the whole time. Like in the dark vampire dungeon. Turn on your cell phone. What about this? Didn't see that coming. The light from the beginning. Yeah. I love that relationship too. And I was definitely scared at the beginning that it was not, I wasn't scared it was going to be romantic, but like there were cheesy things that were like there that I was like, oh, you're bringing up like, he just broke up with his girlfriend, and I don't know, there were other things. And so I kept on being like, oh, like they bump hands. And I was like, well, it can be, but like, you're not making it a thing that I want to see for them. Yeah. And then it's mentioned that Ellie is asexual. And then I was like, okay, whew, I feel safe. Like, they're just friends, and it's just friendly, and like, they're nice and build each other up, and it's great.
Yeah, they have such a beautiful friendship. Because I know publishers always push for that because it sells more books of like romance or like a love triangle or something. And so I also was like, I hope that they don't get together. And then, but also I knew this book had popped up on so many lists of like LGBTQ books to read. And so it had popped up on so many. And so I knew that the main character was asexual just from those lists. And I kept waiting for it to like come up. And it's literally one page, one sentence in like the middle of the book. And it said, and it isn't really addressed. And I just really appreciated that in so many ways. That it's just part of who she is, and it's not a big deal.
Or there are like a few times that it comes up, but just like as part of her, like, oh, I didn't plan on marriage and I hadn't thought about it. Or like bridesmaids, what do they do? Really not into that. Or, you know?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I looked into Darcie Little Badger. She identifies as queer, she's asexual, and there was one article I read where she was getting married to another asexual native, is what she said in her interview. And
yeah, I read that too.
Her other book also has an asexual main character, and I just think that's really cool to like just make it normal in a way that you don't have to explain it too much. It just can be.
Yeah, I think and I don't know if it was probably in one of the same interviews you read, but she was saying like all the books she read growing up, if there was an asexual character, it would be like fit into a specific category, like and I think a lot of teen books are like this for like reasons, but they're teens grappling with their sexuality, a very normal thing that everyone goes through, but this isn't presented that way at all. It's a facet of her identity, and I also really appreciated that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I think that also goes back to with her family just being like, great, you're you, we believe you, we got you, we're here to support you. Yeah. We could wrap up the discussion now, or we could talk a little bit about dreams. Yeah, because the family support, while it starts with, we learn about it most, I think, from her first dream and her cousin telling her that Abe Allerton is a murderer, and then her sharing that with her family. But you probably know that dreams are a really important way of listening to the spirit world and nature and whatever beings and knowledge want to come your way in many Native cultures. And so I was really happy to see what an integral part they played in this book, and not just like how dreams sometimes are in books, which is just actually how many dreams are, a mishmash of things, and then they don't really give you something to grasp. Like these were real interactions, and real messages from Trevor. So yeah, were there any dreams that stood out to you, or?
Not one in particular. Maybe the last one where he rises as a ghost. But I think like it definitely kind of shows the prophetic nature of the dreams, that initially her interactions with Trevor are very like, I just want my family to be okay, and then, you know, protect them. And then it was kind of like, raise me, you have to like bring me back so I can have vengeance. And then the last one where he's like reaching for her and baby Gregory is there. Like it was just like a good progression that made sense. I mean, obviously there's so much foreshadowing about like human ghosts are dangerous. Like through a lot of the first, I was like, if he doesn't come back as a ghost, I'm gonna be a little disappointed.
It had to happen.
Yeah.
I thought it was interesting when she starts to like go into the underworld, and she thinks that she's dreaming at first. I just thought that was an interesting thing that stood out to me, that she couldn't at first tell the difference between dreaming and being in that separate plane of existence, and like the parallels between sleeping and death, and how like she sees her family in her dreams, so she's like reaching to that world in her sleep already, but then she ends up going while she's fully awake. I just thought that was a really interesting plot point.
Another fun fact about Darcie Little Badger that I learned was this whole time I was like, she seems like a nerd. She seems like she's very into like, the fossils and the rocks, and like that's so cool. And then in real life, she studied earth science and she has a PhD in oceanography. And I just really like, one of my favorite passages is the part in the park where she goes and to the underworld and sees the whales and the giant things floating and all the trilobites and everything. You could really tell her like love for science, and it like was, I don't want to say a realistic version of the underworld, but it like made sense. Like it made evolutionary sense of like all these things living together and like the huge span of time that the world has been through. It was very cool and very well done. And then it like made so much sense. I was like, of course she's actually a scientist. Like this makes sense to me.
Yeah, I think that came through in so many of her descriptions and in the different fantasy elements, like the scarecrows spreading with monoculture. Like that earth science background was just definitely present in a voice that you don't hear very often, I think, in young adult books or in fantasy. But that underworld part, it reminded me of a quote from the book. She said, "Wasn't the underworld a vast and frightening place? Wasn't the earth vast and frightening?" And it made the underworld not necessarily that realistic, but also like more familiar in ways that she talked about it being familiar. They're the same creatures, and yeah, just the underworld being a place that you walk onto or you comes to you in your dreams. There's a permeable wall or whatever there. And and I looked up the Lipan Apache creation story, and humans and animals in our world comes from the underworld in that creation story. They check it out beforehand. Everybody peeks up and is like, oh, is it okay? Is it okay? They send people. So I like how interwoven it was. Yeah. I just want to bring up two last things But does anybody else want to bring up any two last things, or?
I guess we'll see what yours are, and then maybe we'll have others.
Okay. My first little one is the illustrations at the beginning of the chapters. It's so fun how they were telling the story of sixth grade, and then how like sometimes things were happening at similar times. Like when sixth grade was fighting the water monster, I think that's when maybe she was accidentally going in the underworld of the water, of the ocean. And so that was just because when I was reading it, I was like, what? This isn't her. Like, what is going on? And then if you go back and flip through it, you're like, oh, it's her. Were you going to say something, Jacob?
Yeah, I don't know if we all had the same copy, but the back cover of the book that I had was absolutely beautiful, and all the ghosts, yes. That's really that's all I have to say. I'm like, I just really like the back cover. I like the whole cover, but like I was just found myself kind of staring at it like, oh, cool.
Yeah. Because I think it's all one of like, that's her, and that's like maybe sixth grade is how I thought it was.
That's beautiful.
Also, I really liked this one where there's like the dinosaurs. Like, I just thought that was very cool. Yeah, I liked them too.
Yeah, when I saw that one, I was like, is there going to be a dino? Are we going to have a velociraptor ghost? What?
I think I had an excited face because this is about the dreams, when we were talking about dreams. Also, I loved that it was her name, Elatsoe, is the hummingbird, and that she's like kind of named her for sixth grade, but also for the hummingbird, and it's because her mom had the dream. I just thought that was very cool little detail, and I remembered it and had to say it.
Me too. I wanted to know, like, because she said the wings, reflected like galaxies or something. I was like, more about the hummingbird. There are so many things, and I was like, more, please. I want to hear about it. The mom, she tells a story at one point, and so stories are also very important in Native culture. Some of them sometimes are considered like beings, and the mom talks about how, like, I'm not just telling you the story for no reason, to the Ronnie's little crew when she's going to tell the story about the mammoth, but also when she tells Allie the story about sixth grade not coming back from the underworld. She talks about the eureka moment and like how stories help you scaffold knowledge and information, and how it can become part of you better that way, and how knowledge, stories are knowledge and power. So I just loved in this book the interweaving of so many stories upon stories. Like, she's telling a story and then they tell a story within that sometimes, which was so cool. But the mom talks about her calling up a mammoth to save her at this particular moment in time. And that just brought up social justice aspects again because of missing and murdered Native women, and so many violent crimes against Native people that go uninvestigated, just like are left on the sidelines. And I thought that was another one of those places where Little Badger took a moment that can happen in real life that's really awful and violent, and was like, here's what I'd like to see: a mammoth smush you. And it was amazing.
Yeah. I thought maybe sometimes the villain of Abe was a little on the nose, of like, he's literally stealing lives and like body parts in a way for the rich, and like it's a little on the nose, but it also like it's a good metaphor, I guess. It's like, it just makes sense, right? Of like that they're this town that's just here, that they moved their town and just took the land, and they're taking lives, and just like the disregard for other people's lives, both by white people and like colonization. Like it just all like made sense in a way, and I thought it was very well done.
It was so on the nose that at one point I was like, are you tricking me?
Yeah.
Because of the metaphors and everything being so clear. I think by the time we got to them rifling through the trash cans and finding the beer, and he came out, and like at that point he'd like gone to the funeral, and he throws the bicentennial things, and he comes out and he sees her, and he's like, oh, do you need some money? Like, I see you're rifling through the trash, you know? And when he did that and was like, I was like, wait, okay, did you set us up like he's a murderer, but he's really not? Like, is he a good person? And I liked how Jay, her always supportive cheerleader friend, was like, at some point in the beginning, she was expecting Jay to say, oh, he's a real stand-up guy. But instead, Jay was like, watch out, he's well connected and has money. So that's extra scary because of all of that power. So I was just like, Jay, good job just believing. Here I am being like, what? Are we being tricked? Is he really a good guy? Yeah.
In that moment, I thought, and this is, of course, there's no way that I can know this for sure, but I thought that would be especially powerful for young readers when, you know, the villain is not some scuzzy, well, yes, it is, but it's not your typical murderer. It's somebody who is very well presented and has a lot of privilege and power in the community. And then, in fact, that person is scarier than whatever image of a murderer or, you know, whatever stereotypical image you conjure in your mind. It's the reality of privilege and power is actually more terrifying.
And the complicity of people, how it's like not just him, like he's doing the magic, but everybody in town knows what's happening, and they're okay with it, and they're all complicit, even if they're not doing it themselves.
Right? Like they wanted to go in there and save everyone, and everyone's like, oh no, we're good. We're fine, actually. Just move on.
And yeah, Ellie doesn't want to let Trevor just eradicate them all as pests, like he calls them. She's like, no, there are children there that Trevor helped bring up. We can't just eradicate everyone. That's not how we do, and that's not what they deserve. Which, yeah, goes back to the vengeance versus justice thing and the wiggly line.
Yeah. So even though it's on the nose, it's complicated, and I think that's illustrated very well.
Yeah. I really liked it. Thank you for suggesting it.
That is a great place to end. Thank you so much, Ariel, for facilitating, and thank everyone out there for watching, and we will see you next time.